Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Way Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 5th of May, 2022. All right, everyone, let's get into it. So, another All Core Devs update from Tim Byko today. This is the All Core Devs update number 11. This is entirely focused on the merge, as Tim says here. So, this was very merge heavy. We have basically a TLDR of what's kind of like left to go for the merge to kind of like happen, or for the merge to kind of like happen on mainnet. We also have this really nice image that's updated that Trent Van Epps put together a while ago, but it's been updated to show kind of like where we are today. So you can see on the top right of the image, we are here as in Q2 2022, where we did the Kiln testnet, we were doing the shadow forks, and then date in the future TBA to fork public testnets, announce a TTD, the terminal total difficulty, and release clients there, and then date TBA the actual merge, which would come after that, which, you know, as you guys know, what the merge entails there. Now, what's kind of like left to get to the merge? Like, what's the actual path here? Well, Tim details it by saying a few mainnet shadow forks without issues. I said to you guys the last mainnet shadow fork that was done last Saturday, I believe, not the one that just passed, the one before that, went ahead with almost entirely no issues. I think there was just some minor issues here and there. And I guess like there's going to be more mainnet shadow forks over the coming weeks. Second would be clients passing the various merge test suites, which are ongoing and will be ongoing for a while. And I spoke about kind of like that merge test kind of like resource yesterday that I kind of like highlighted. And then third would be smooth deployments across existing public test nets such as Gurley and Sephora, I think the name is. So yeah, those are kind of like the three major things to go. So we're really close, guys. Like, we're so close. Like, if I had to kind of like put a month on it at this stage, look, I'm leaning more towards August. I've said this multiple times. I'm leaning more towards August than July. June's out, obviously, but July, it's a coin toss still. Like, I'm not convinced that it can happen in July at this point, just because I think that taking a more conservative approach, making sure we do kind of like all the mainnet shadow forks without issues, making sure the clients are all tested, and then obviously doing the deployments on the public test nets. It's already kind of like May, right? So May, June, July, August. It's still a coin flip for July, but I would lean more towards August. I'd probably put my money on August at this stage. So that's not very far away, guys. Like, it's actually really close, and we the path there is clear. Like, we can see the light end of the tunnel. There's no kind of like major obstacles. It's just going through the motions, so to speak. And Tim says that at the end of his kind of like post here, where he says, while everyone is excited to see Ethereum transition to proof of stake, this is not the time to cut corners. Ensuring a safe and seamless transition for Ethereum users and the rich ecosystem built on the network is our number one priority. We're almost there, when merge soon. And I think this is a really great point that Tim's brought up here. Look, will anyone care if there was like it took 2 to 3, 4 months longer or whatever to deliver the merge in a year from now? No. I doubt people will even care. Like, once the merge goes live, they'll just stop caring. They'll be like, oh, the merge went live. Cool. What's the next thing, right? The same thing happened with EIP 1559. But will people care and remember if we attempt the merge and it goes wrong? Yes, that will be a stain on Ethereum a lot longer than some kind of like few month delay around the merge, or the merge coming a few months later than other people expect. Because I don't like the term delay, as you guys know. But yeah, I think to Tim's point here, we need to ensure this is a very safe and seamless transition for Ethereum. And he says here as well, the merge is by far the most complex upgrade that they've ever planned for Ethereum, and it is, like, by far. Seriously, there has never been something that's required so much coordination in the Ethereum ecosystem to get done, across so many different teams, so many different people, so many different kind of like stakeholders within the ecosystem. So getting it right is obviously critical here. So I suggest reading this whole post. It's really great. It kind of like goes through, as I said, like everything that needs to be done, kind of like the status of the ongoing things right now. And a few other bits of information that might be of interest to you, with links to kind of like learn more here. So yeah, it's really close, I think. And it's 1 year since the Rayonism prototypes went live, which were the first kind of like merge prototypes. And I remember speaking about this on the refuel, and it's only been a year, guys. Like, I know it may seem like it's been such a long time, because crypto moves so quickly. It feels like you age like 10 years in a month, right? But it really hasn't at the end of the day. And we've made so much progress in the last year towards this. And we're finally kind of like there, guys. Like it's so, so close. In a few months, I'm going to be talking about, I'm not going to be talking about the merge coming soon anymore. I'm not even going to really be talking about the merge because the merge will be done. I'll be moved on to talking about everything coming in the first network upgrade, which is the Shanghai update after the merge is done. So I'm super, super pumped. I'm super excited, obviously. This is going to be the biggest event in Ethereum's history. So let's not rush it. Let's get there safe and sound. And let's ensure that there's no issues with it once it kind of like happens so that we can do a safe merge and then move on to everything else. Not having to worry about the merge anymore. The development teams and kind of like the research teams get freed up to kind of like work on everything else, which I actually consider the stuff coming in Shanghai to be much more, I guess, like impactful than the merge itself. The merge obviously lays the groundwork for everything. Without it, we wouldn't be able to get to some of those other upgrades such as sharding. But with Shanghai, we have a few really cool things coming, such as the withdrawals for stakers being enabled, which actually, some people go, oh, that's bearish or whatever. I don't believe it's bearish or bullish or anything like that. I don't have an opinion on that part of it. But what I find really cool about it is that we're going to be able to build new things around staking that are only able to be built because there's not just a one-way bridge anymore. It actually works both ways, where you can stake and unstake and stuff like that. And I'm looking forward to what I'm calling the great reshuffling of stake on Ethereum, and seeing how people kind of like move their stake around into what services and stuff like that, because then we can get better insight into what the Ethereum staking ecosystem will look like in a post-withdrawal world. And the second thing is obviously proto-dank sharding, which is going to basically like give layer 2 so much scalability for many years to come, and it's going to be amazing. The costs are going to drop dramatically from there. It's going to drop to pennies essentially, and the reason why I'm looking forward to that so much is because it's finally going to kill, I think, most of the rhetoric around fees being too high on Ethereum. Because there's still people today who are like, 50 cents or dollars for a swap is still too high. And totally, like, I completely I sympathize with that, and I completely agree with that. But and then once we get that to kind of like pennies on the dollar, I think at that point there's just not going to be that rhetoric anymore. So we're going to see how that plays out. But those are like the two things that I'm most excited for. But there are a few other EIPs coming with it. You can just search like Ethereum Shanghai update, and it should show you the EIPs that are coming in and kind of like that update, and all of them there, or the ones that are kind of like tentatively scheduled, because sometimes some get pulled out, sometimes some get, a lot of times they get modified, and some new ones get put in. So I definitely recommend checking all that out. But yeah, guys, like this is the most exciting time in Ethereum core protocol development, and it will be for maybe the next 2, 3, 4 years, so to speak. So and there's just so much to pay attention to. Like it's almost kind of like, for me, it's like I don't want everything to be delivered at once, because then it's kind of like, what else do I have to look forward to? But then I go and look at Vitalik's roadmap that he put out with the surge, the purge, all that sort of stuff, and that's a 10-year roadmap, guys. Like I'm going to be honest with you, there's some stuff on there that is truly kind of like in the very early research stages that isn't critical to Ethereum's success, but is like a really nice to have. And that's coming, and that's kind of like why I view that as kind of like a 10-year roadmap in terms of kind of like getting that stuff to mainnet. So we're booked out. Like I hope I'm doing the refuel still in 10 years, and you'll be hearing me bang on about the latest kind of like thing. Maybe in 10 years I'm talking about snarkifying the base layer, or maybe that comes before. Maybe in 5 years I'm talking about that. That'd be really cool. But definitely give this blog post a read. I'll link it in the YouTube description for you. All right, so Bartek from L2Beat has put out another banger thread about kind of rollups today. And this one focuses on how rollups kind of like post their transaction data to layer 1 Ethereum. So as you guys know, to be considered a rollup, you need to post both kind of like your call data on chain, and also the proof that you've kind of like run the transactions on your layer 2 network on chain to be considered a rollup. And by on chain, I mean layer 1 Ethereum. Now, you can see the different costs here for different networks that do this. Metis network is claiming to be the cheapest here as an optimistic rollup, but Bartek's thread goes into this and basically explains how Metis is actually no longer considered an optimistic rollup. And this is because in April, they had a major upgrade go live where they've just taken the call data and placed it off-chain. It's not on layer 1 Ethereum. So that basically makes it a Validium, or some people are calling this kind of like an optimistic Validium, or an Optimium, I think, or something like that. I saw someone call it, but it's not a roll up anymore, because to be considered a roll up, as I said, you need both data and the transaction kind of like proofs on chain. If you don't have both of them, then you're not a roll up anymore. And some people will say, oh, it's semantics. No, this is a strict technical definition. Like I think that we shouldn't compromise on this as a definition, because then what it tells us is, it tells us kind of like the security properties of these things, because Metis no longer has the security of Ethereum, or the full security of Ethereum. It still has from what I know, the transactions proofs going on Ethereum, but it doesn't have the data anymore. And so it kind of like has the same security properties as something like a Validium, whereas a full rollup has the best kind of like security properties you can get because they inherit Ethereum security directly there. And that is why Optimism and Arbitrum One and Boba, being true optimistic rollups, cost a lot more on a kind of like percentage basis than Metis does today, because they're just literally different things. So I think the L2 Fees website where this screenshot comes from is going to change this, and they split it out and kind of like basically make sure that users understand that these things are different. I mean, even ZK Sync here is cheaper. It is a ZK rollup, but the thing is, it's again a different kind of like technology, right? It's not an optimistic rollup. So when comparing these things, I think you have to compare apples to apples. You can compare apples to oranges and kind of like compare them in terms of like trade-offs and kind of like what you consider to be better. But if you're comparing them like for like, you really do need to compare optimistic rollups to optimistic rollups. You know, ZK rollups to ZK rollups, Validiums to Validiums, all that sort of stuff there, right? And by doing so, we can kind of like further educate users around the trade-offs around these things, because it's all trade-offs at the end of the day. So I just wanted to highlight this thread. Definitely go give it a read. It's a short thread. It kind of like goes into a bit more detail here. But I think it's really dangerous what some of these L2s are doing. Like, I don't know for sure if Metis has been doing this, but I'm pretty sure, I think they're still calling themselves a rollup. Yeah, so they're even doing it in their bio here. They're saying L2 Ethereum rollup, right? And they're going cheapest L2, fastest transaction, blah, blah, blah. Look, this is misleading marketing. Like, they're not a roll-up anymore. You can't be a roll-up if your data is stored off-chain, if it's not stored on Ethereum layer 1. And I think that is kind of like a strictly kind of like technical argument, but it is widely agreed upon by the people building these systems. And if you're not like a roll-up, then yeah, you shouldn't be calling yourself a roll-up there. But I guess like there are holy wars being fought over this, because obviously Metis has a token, and Optimism is going to have a token, and all the rest of them are going to have tokens. So from there, we're going to see just kind of like a bit of ugliness kind of spawn here. And it already started. I mean, there's already been kind of like communities bickering at each other about which is better. Obviously, the ZK communities have been bickering at the optimistic ones and being like, we're better than you. We ZK is the future, blah, blah, blah. But you guys know my view on this. I think that you got to be pragmatic when it comes to these things. ZK rollups are amazing, but there are no generalized EVM-compatible ZK rollups live today. There are no ZK EVMs live on mainnet today, whereas optimistic rollups have been live for many months now, and they've been growing just fine. Their fees have been coming down, and in the kind of like new year, when the Shanghai update goes live with proto-danksharding, their costs are going to collapse. And then people bring up, there's other trade-offs like, the withdrawal delays. That's solved, guys. Like, how many times, like, I personally have not used the kind of like the 7-day withdrawal feature from Optimism or Arbitrum to withdraw from these L2s. I use the bridges all the time. Like, I use all the bridges that are available on these kind of like networks. Depending on the network, some of them support others, some of them don't. But I think, in that case, for the 7-day withdrawal one, I would use it for like high value withdrawals. I probably wouldn't go through the bridge, but I'm not doing anything of like super high value on these L2s yet. I'm definitely playing around with smaller amounts on there. And yeah, that 7-day withdrawal period has kind of like been solved. And the funny thing is, I actually learned this the other day. You can bring that 7-day withdrawal period down to actually only a few hours. And I forget exactly why this is the case, but I think it has more. I think it has more to do with kind of like how quickly you could kind of like prove that there was fraud or not in kind of like the system, and how many kind of watches you had. I think so. Don't quote me on that, because I think that's just something, as I said, something I learned the other day, and I've kind of like lost it. I haven't gone back and kind of like done the further research there. But the 7-day thing is kind of like just been an arbitrary number. It's not a fixed thing that can be brought down as well. So when it comes to trade-offs of these sorts of things, I think there are trade-offs, but I think at the end of the day, optimistic rollups and ZK rollups are going to live in harmony for a long time. And I speak in harmony from like a tech perspective, and maybe not from a community or social perspective. But that's fine. I totally get that. And maybe that's a good thing, that like the communities are all bickering at each other and there's competition there, so that we kind of like get better end products at the end of the day. Because as you guys know, competition breeds innovation. I think we've already seen that play out in small bits, but yeah, it's going to play out further as time goes on. But I'll link this thread in the YouTube description for you to check out as well. So Jeff from the ENS team put out an interesting tweet today where he said, ENS is in the unique position where we have no investors to please whilst building a credibly neutral protocol. We have decades of runway and an organic community that is stronger and more resilient than any I've seen since the OG Ethereum community. Things are looking up. Now, this is a really good point and really, really kind of like cool thing to think about. Most projects in this ecosystem can't boast that they have no investors to please because they've all taken investment. And taking investment is not a bad thing, guys. Like it is honestly required for most projects because at the end of the day, not everyone has kind of like a way to sustain themselves if they were to quit their job and start a new company, right? They need investment. Now, I don't know what the situation is with the ENS team, with the core team there, but I'm going to assume, they've been around for a while, so they bought ETH early on and they've been able to sustain themselves off that. But there might be other ways that they're sustaining themselves. I know some of them worked on both ENS and other things. Look, I'm not going to try and kind of like comment on that, but I think there's definitely an element of them being kind of like early ETH people and benefiting from that. So they didn't need to kind of like ever raise money, which is obviously really cool. Now, as I discussed yesterday about how things can look like they're succeeding and look like they're going really well, but the token doesn't necessarily have to capture this value. And as we've seen with the ENS token since it went live, what ended up happening was that it was really hyped up. It launched at a really large market cap, and its circulating supply was quite low. It's that classic kind of like fully diluted value meme thing. So I think it's down like 70% or something from that all-time high. But ENS is killing it. I mean, I covered this on the Refuel the other day where I said ENS is making record revenue. They're kind of like reached their millionth ENS registered. They're doing like so much cool things behind the scenes. They have like an extremely awesome community. They, as Jeff says here, they have decades of runway. And you take all that into account. But the thing is, at the end of the day, the token is still worth a lot of money because it just opened up at such a large kind of like market cap. And this is why I always warn you guys with these tokens. Like, it's not me giving investment advice around them. And there are exceptions to the rule. Like, I actually thought that the Ape coin wouldn't do as well as it did. I thought it would just crash, but it's done remarkably well. So I underestimated that. But the rule generally is if something has a kind of like relatively small circulating supply, and it opens up at a really high market cap, and it's got literally no way to accrue value, then it's generally not going to maintain that value, and it's going to pretty much crash. Whether it has investors or not, it doesn't matter. So I think that's kind of like, I guess, something that was unfortunate with ENS. It was just so hyped up. And, I dare to say that the similar things could play out with other tokens, other hyped up tokens coming up. I'm not going to name any names, but this is kind of like how I view these sorts of things from that perspective. But I don't want to hop on about like that too much there. Well, I just wanted to highlight that, how cool it is that ENS is in such a unique position that they don't have to please investors, right? But then you can kind of like say, okay, well, they don't have to please private investors like VCs and funds, but there are obviously people who bought the ENS token that will be expecting a return. But then you can kind of like fall into the legality of it and think to yourself, well, I mean, ENS is not a security. It doesn't promise returns to anyone. It is a governance token. And that's why these teams often will say it's a governance token. It has no value, stuff like that. Because as soon as you say that it is more than that, you open the door wide open for any securities regulator to come in and say, hey, that's a security, and then your token can't trade anywhere. I mean, we've already seen what happened to, I guess, like XRP. Even though XRP is a security and it's pretty much a scam, they were delisted from Coinbase immediately after the kind of like suit against them from the SEC came to light. So, that would happen immediately to any other token that kind of like the SEC or any other big securities regulator went after. And even if they haven't won the case of classifying it as a security, that risk is just too much for a lot of these exchanges to kind of like take there. But good thing is that we have decentralized exchanges in Ethereum, so you'd still be able to trade it. But yeah, that's the kind of like reason why you see these teams always say it's a valueless governance token and a lot of them don't even want to accrue any value to the token. Like look at Uni, for example. Uniswap Labs is probably too scared to kind of like let the fee switch be turned on, because then they open themselves up to, hey, this is paying a dividend essentially. This must be a security sort of thing. So there's all that plays into it. But yeah, just thought it was cool to highlight the fact that ENS is one of the only projects in Ethereum that can boast not having any private investors to please, which is pretty cool, but doesn't necessarily mean that the token is going to accrue value. I'm not saying it will or won't. Obviously, I love ENS, but I just wanted to use this as a data point for you guys around what I was talking about yesterday, around kind of like token valuations and things like that. So yeah. All right, so Lido has released their first version of their Lido on Ethereum scorecard today, which is very timely because, as you guys know, Lido has become a big topic of discussion recently because most of the new ETH that's being staked is going through Lido. They're becoming an absolutely massive player on the network in terms of, on the Beacon chain in terms of like ETH at stake. And we want them to be good actors on Ethereum. And you know what? This scorecard is actually a really good step to them kind of like proving that they are. And what they kind of like run through on this scorecard is kind of like looking at where they're already succeeding in what they're trying to do at Lido, right? For Ethereum kind of like staking here. And they've got a few points here, such as, you know, Lido's kind of like, and the validator set legally and physically unrelated. Apparently that's going good. Operators running their own nodes, no white labeling. That's great. Stuff like good performance. And then other things that could be better, such as kind of like Lido's hostile takeover via hard fork is possible. It's currently fully possible to just hijack the governance address, I think, because of the multi-sig and stuff like that. And there's a few more points here, but I won't go through them all. But then they're going kind of like where we're doing well but can improve, and then where our next priorities kind of like lie. So this is really cool because it's like a public scorecard of like how well Lido is doing on a number of different fronts, and they're acutely aware of what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, and they want to improve upon. Now, I really love this. As I've mentioned, I think it was on the Monday's Refuel when I talked about on the marathon one where I talked about Lido. They're not the enemy, guys, and I'm actually really glad Lido exists, because if it wasn't for Lido, a lot of the ETH being staked would be going through centralized exchanges right now, which is much worse than Lido because of a few different factors. One, Lido actually has, put out a path to decentralization. Now, whether they stick to that path or not is another thing, but the thing is, at least there's an option for them to do that. There's no option for a centralized exchange to do that because they don't want to do that. Like, it doesn't make any sense for them to do that. So when you're staking with a centralized exchange, it's always going to be centralized. Two, it's given people a way to do really great liquid staking because you get the ST ETH token. Three, at least with Lido, it goes to like, I think almost 30 different providers right now, or different validators, rather than just one with a centralized exchange. And four, they seem to be very aligned with Ethereum and Ethereum values and Ethereum's mission. You know, they put out things like this scorecard. None of the centralized exchanges are doing this or anything like that. So I think that Lido is fine, is great. Now, would I wish that they didn't have such a large market share? Of course, I would wish that Rocket Pool would be getting a larger market share, and other services like Swell, Stakewise, and a bunch of others out there. But as I said yesterday, like Rocket Pool suffers from the fact that it's kind of like limited by how much RETH can be minted right now. They're working on that, all that sort of stuff there. And as I mentioned before, I'm looking forward to the great reshuffling of stake post withdrawals because of the fact that we're going to see kind of like what a actual Beacon, like a staking ecosystem looks like in its final form, in its kind of like two-way form rather than the one-way bridge we have today. But I'll link this scorecard in the YouTube description. You can check it out below. I'm running out of time here, so I want to get through the rest of the updates before I do that. So Zappa introduced Zappa Studio today, which is an open platform for app integration. So now anyone, anywhere can now create and submit app integrations for Zappa. So this obviously applies to developers mainly, but as developers build these things out, it's better for users. So what people can do, if you're a developer right now, you can go to this blog post, which runs through like everything that's happening here, has links to all the relevant kind of like resources that you need. And I just think this is really cool because Zappa is more than just like a portfolio tracker. Obviously, it has so many things going on. Like there's so many different integrations, so many different kind of I guess like zaps and stuff like that, as they call them, and things you can do on the platform there. And they kind of like say that their core team has so far written 250 plus app integrations from scratch. But despite this, the demand is still very high, and there's over 700 pending integration requests right now. So Studio will help to relieve this backlog and help the Zappa core team kind of like obviously kind of like focus on other things rather than trying to get through this massive backlog here. But this is awesome. I love this. If you're a developer, definitely go check it out. I'll link it in the YouTube description. So Sandeep from Polygon put together a nice little TLDR on what Polygon SuperNets are. Now, I mentioned that Polygon SuperNets the other day when I kind of like when they announced it, but basically Sandeep describes them as Polygon SuperNets are dedicated public application-specific blockchains. They are EVM-based, natively connected to Ethereum and Polygon POS chain, convertible to ZK rollups in the future, protocol level value accrual for dApp tokens, and will come with multiple consensus options. This is a really cool summary of what it is, and I kind of like talked about it the other day. As I said, the other day, Polygon supernets are basically Polygon's answer to Avalanche kind of like subnets. So they're essentially kind of like side chains. They're not like a layer 2 or a roll up, so to speak, but they can be. Like as Sandeep mentions here, they can be converted to a ZK roll up in the future once that functionality has been put in, which is really cool because I guess the way you would look at this is kind of like the supernets technology, the sidechain technology, the EVM kind of like sidechain technology is basically perfected at this point. Like, there are certain more things that can come to it, but like it's kind of like a solved problem. Whereas stuff like scalable ZK rollups and even scalable optimistic rollups are still being worked on. So in the future, when those kind of like things become more mature and become like easier to work with, you can possibly convert your already kind of like bustling supernet to a ZK rollup, and I think that's very, very cool. And you know, you guys know I'm actually kind of bearish long term on app specific blockchains, like sovereign app specific blockchains, but I'm really bullish on ones that are layer 2s. Like for example, DYDX is a huge kind of like app specific layer 2, and I'm bullish on that model rather than the ones that are sovereign. And by sovereign, I mean the ones that kind of like literally have to bootstrap their own validator set and basically a sidechain and not a layer 2. So very cool to see that Sandeep has kind of like given this summary here of what they are, and I can't wait to see what people build with them. All right, so Peter from the Geth team has put out a kind of like pull request of a new feature that he coded up, which allows for in kind of like in Geth client supply calculation of ETH and issuance tracking. So it's basically opt-in. Mostly, he made it as a request from Justin Drake, but he hasn't shipped it just yet. So essentially, I mean, some of you may remember this debate that was had a while ago around it. There's no easy way to calculate kind of like ETH issuance and kind of like ETH's current supply because it's not built directly into the clients. And people built tools around this. They built kind of like they built a bunch of scripts around this, and then it became very easy to compute this, and it was fine. But now, kind of like Peter wants to, or I guess I coded up a thing to put this directly into Geth itself, so you wouldn't need an external script to do it. So he kind of like, he said he's debating shipping it, and I just said, you know, ship. But yeah, he kind of like says here, you know, why the reason for not shipping would be maintenance overhead, and he also doesn't want to add something that's not used by most users. Now, look, I mean, when I think about this sort of stuff, it may not be used by most users because it's not something you're going to be using like every day or every week or something. Like you're not going to query the current ETH supply every day. Like, for example, maybe some people will, but most people aren't going to do that. But I still think it's an incredibly important and useful feature to have, just so that we can kind of like not have to rely on third-party scripts. And obviously, you know, knowing the current circulating supply of ETH is quite important. But the funny thing is that even if you don't have a tool to kind of, I guess, like calculate this, knowing that the current ETH supply hasn't been tampered with, you can do from just running a full node because all the state kind of like diffs match up and all the kind of like state roots match up. So you wouldn't actually need to run this to kind of like make sure that there hasn't been some kind of like fuckery, or for lack of a better word, with the chain. But still, it's good to have this. It's obviously something that a lot of people will get a lot of value out of. So I hope Peter ships this. Maybe you can encourage him to ship it. Maybe we can kind of like send him some kind of like ETH for shipping it or something like that. So love to see what he does here. So speaking of, I guess, like ETH supply, David Hoffman put out a tweet today asking where he can view ETH supply across all the various chains. Because if you go to DeFi Pulse today, it only tracks Ethereum layer 1. And if you go to kind of like the ETH locked in DeFi chart there, which I'm going to do right now, it's trending down, right? But in saying that, it peaked at like 11 million in April of 2021, and now a year later, it's down to 7.2 million ETH, right? It is measured in ETH, not in dollars. Now, this is because a lot of ETH has moved to, obviously, the alt L1s and also L2s and also staking. Now, Holger here has put out kind of like a shared kind of like a table here, which kind of tracks where this ETH has gone. Well, as you can see, there's been over 12 million ETH deposited into staking. Some of that has come from the ETH locked in DeFi. Then you can see that there's 1.4 million ETH on BSC, which would have come from Ethereum. Obviously, it has to come from Ethereum, right? And then there's 600,000 on Arbitrum, 400,000 on Avalanche, 400,000 on Polygon, and then so on with this list. So this is really good to kind of like contextualize here, because if you were just to look at the DeFi Pulse chart, you would kind of like conclude that, oh, DeFi is dying, or people aren't willing to lock their ETH in DeFi anymore. When the reality is that there's more to do with your ETH now, with obviously with staking, but there's also other chains to send your ETH to, whether they be L1 chains, side chains, layer 2s, and that still counts, I believe. So if you take all that into account, take staking into account as well, this is kind of like total to 15.2 million, and then you add on the 7 million from Locked On Ethereum, you get to like 22.2 million ETH that's kind of like being actively used right now. And it's probably higher than that because there are things not accounted for and stuff like that as well. So just a cool little thing I wanted to point out here for you guys. And thanks to David for tweeting this out. All right, second last thing to get through, just these blog posts from Data Always here, where they talk about network effects, Metcalfe's law, and how this all kind of like plays into crypto network valuations. Now, this is a kind of a lengthy blog post, but well worth the read. Something that I think has been talked about in the past, but not kind of, I guess, like been, I guess, quantified in such a great way. So definitely recommend giving this blog post a read. I'll link it in the YouTube description below, but I'm not going to TLDR because it gets quite technical. But I do suggest giving it a read. It was a great read. All right, finally here, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to this conference that's happening, or conference, or I guess meetup that's happening next month in Hawaii called HODLerCon 2022. So this is happening from June 17th to June 26th. There's kind of like been a whole kind of, I guess, like a bunch of events happening. There's going to be a hotel, obviously, that people are going to be staying at, and this is being organized by the ETH Finance folks. So if you are interested in going to Hawaii for obviously a holiday and hanging around with ETH people, well, this is the perfect opportunity to do it. I would love to go to this, but I don't, like, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned it on the replay the other day, I don't think I can do any long haul travel for a while. But yeah, I'm going to FOMO missing out on this. And actually, there's not really many direct flights from kind of like Australia to Hawaii either. I was looking at flights before just out of curiosity. I would have to go to like LA and do a stopover, I think, and then it would be like a long stopover. It would be like 35 hours of travel time. I am not doing that, guys. I'm sorry. As much as I would love to go to kind of like Hawaii and hang out with ETH people, I'm not going to do that. But you should. If you're in the US, then it's like a no-brainer, honestly. Like if you're in the US or even potentially in kind of like Western Europe, where you're much closer to kind of like this than I am, you should definitely do this. Actually, I don't actually know. Is Western Europe as far away from Hawaii as Australia is? I think it might even be further away because Hawaii is closer to Australia than the continental US. Continental? Yeah, I think that's the right word. US. So maybe Australia is closer on that. But if you're in the US, you're definitely closer. So you should and you don't have to deal with the massive time zone difference that I would have to deal with. So you should definitely kind of like just check this out, decide if you want to go to it. And the cool thing about this is that it actually coincides with ETH New York as well. I believe ETH New York is June 24th to 26th. So you could go to HODLerCon for a few days, just have a relaxing holiday and then fly over to New York City for ETH New York, right? As I said, I would have loved to have done this, but not so close. Maybe if this was happening in August or September, I would have done it. But unfortunately, it's kind of like too soon after I got back from my last trip. But anyway, definitely check this out. I'll link it in the YouTube description. I've gone over time, so I'm going to end it there. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks everyone.